Welcome back to the UNC OBGYN Quality Improvement Toolbox lecture series. Today we're going to be talking about check sheets. Today's lecture is pretty short because a check sheet is pretty simple. A check sheet is simply a tool for gathering data during a PDSA cycle, with the goal being to make data gathering quick and easy and to minimize the number of mistakes in data gathering that happen through good design of your check sheet. So many people have heard of checklists, fewer have heard of check sheets. What's the difference? Well, a check sheet is a tally sheet for data collection, whereas a checklist is a list of reminders to help keep you from forgetting steps when you're going through a process. There's lots of good resources out there for checklists, what they're good for, how to design good ones. Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto is one of the best known in popular culture, and it's worth a read if you haven't. But there aren't so many resources for building a good check sheet for data collection, so that's what we're going to focus on today. There are many different tools for data collection during a QI project, so when would you use a check sheet? Well, like I said, it's just a tally sheet for collecting data on numbers or rates of occurrence or things. So most frequently you'd use a check sheet during observation of a part of your process that you're trying to improve. For instance, you'll recognize when you see the examples of a check sheet in this slideshow, you'll recognize them from last lecture when we were talking about when in the ventilator-associated pneumonia project, they were tallying the number of kits, oral care kits that were used per patient per day. Other kinds of data collection tools that are used are things like surveys or focus groups like we performed for the nurses and the RTs in that project. Also things like EMR review to find things like outcomes or duration of a condition, and billing reports to look at the costs for different phases of care or the implied cost for different problems that might arise. So if you think back to the template that I provided from last lecture for planning a PDSA cycle, and we look at the one for the ventilator-associated pneumonia project, for each of the questions that you want to answer, there was a fulfillment method or a planned way of getting that data. And in that project, specifically for looking at how often oral care was occurring, a check sheet was the most appropriate kind of data collection device because that data was going to be gathered by tallying a number of items that were used each day and a number of patients that had this condition each day on a shift. This is the check sheet that was used in that part of the ventilator-associated pneumonia project. And as you can see, it's very simple. It just contains the things that you want to tally, spaces for you to record those numbers, and some very basic instructions for where to look, for instance, for the different oral care kits that are going to be counted. The thing to take away from this is that check sheets are not complicated and they don't have to be long and confusing. In fact, you should make them as short and as simple as you possibly can. Let's go back to the beginning and talk about how to build a check sheet from scratch. The first step is to list your variables. And when you list your variables, then you want to define each variable as specifically as possible so that there's no confusion about how to count or what to count. Then you need to identify what type of variable each one is, either discrete or categorical versus continuous. And for discrete variables specifically, when planning, it's good to determine codes to use so that when you're entering your data into a spreadsheet, it's faster and quicker. Next, determine the expected range for each variable, and that's helpful just so that when gathering data, you know if you have an outlier and therefore might have a mistake in gathering data. And finally, specifically to identify the location of data, so that if you know where something can be found, for instance, but someone else might not, it makes it easier for data collection to be performed by multiple different people. Some of these things may look familiar from when you're building a process map, and they should. And they should if you build a gather in detail table for any of your steps when making your process map. If you pull that back out, there was a table when looking at a gather step where you were supposed to look at each piece of data that you needed to gather, plan an expected range, and then specify a location where that data could be found. So if you have done a gather in detail table for the step that you're going to be observing in this part of your project, you've already done a lot of the legwork for building your check sheet. Okay, we're going to go through a couple of quick examples. First, let's say we're doing a project to improve monitoring of hemoglobin A1C levels in diabetic patients. Let's say that one of the variables we want to keep track of in this project is number of times hemoglobin A1C was checked for each patient. In planning for a check sheet, we need to be specific about what time period we're talking about and what counts as checked or not checked, so that every data collector is on the same page. So a specific definition would be the number of times that a physician order for hemoglobin A1C is recorded in the medical record within the past 12 months. Now, everyone collecting data for the project knows exactly what counts and what doesn't for a number of times hemoglobin A1C is checked. This is an example of a simple planning table for building a check sheet, where you list each variable, and you can see in the first row the one we just talked about, its specific definition, whether it's continuous or discrete, and the expected range. As you can see, I listed a second example here, the most recent hemoglobin A1C, and that was defined specifically as the most recent hemoglobin A1C recorded in the medical record within the past 12 months, also being a continuous variable, and then an expected range for this one as well. I mentioned earlier about planning for codes for discrete variables, and this is what I mean. So for instance, for race, there's a limited number of responses to that question, and rather than typing out the word every time when you're entering data into your spreadsheet or your database, having a numerical code for those responses just makes it quicker and easier. Nothing complicated about it. Here's our sample check sheet for this project. All of the variables that we've delineated are here. What I didn't mention before about the discrete variables and the codes is that you don't need to list those codes on your check sheet. That can just clutter things up. But having the planning template, planning table that we just made available for everyone who's going to be entering data for the project, along with the codes that you came up with for discrete variables, will ensure that everyone is on the same page and you don't have any errors in data entry from that perspective. So this looks pretty simple, but we're going to talk next about some elements of design that make your check sheets easier to use. As we look at the next couple of examples, I want you to remember to think carefully when you're designing your own check sheets about what elements of design and layout make them easier and faster to use for those who are collecting data for your project. This is a sample part of a check sheet that I found online somewhere, and it just jumped out at me as having a lot of bad design elements that I wanted to talk about. So the first thing that stands out to me, if you were thinking about using this to collect data, is with all of these indications for C-section, how in the world are these organized? Are they organized most common to least common? Are they organized alphabetically? Clearly not. They seem to just be randomly jumbled in there together. And so if you are doing the data collecting, how hard is it going to be for you to quickly find the option that you need? Next, if you notice from the top of the check sheet to the bottom of the check sheet, you go from being expected to check an answer to suddenly being expected to circle an answer, which begs the question is why? Does that make it easier for you to collect data somehow? And then also the number of columns changes, which isn't a big deal, I guess, for a short check sheet, but if you have a lot of pieces of data you want to collect, then the more consistent you can be with your layout and your formatting, the easier it will be to use. I didn't bother to recreate this check sheet in a way that makes sense because I think all of those things I mentioned are obvious, and we'll see some of them again in the next example. This example again comes from the ventilator-associated pneumonia project that we've been talking about throughout this course, from a different part of the project when they were looking at intubations themselves and seeing if they could decrease the initial intubation rate. The first thing that jumps out at me about this check sheet is that the label of the first piece of data and then the options available are a little confusing in that it's titled attending, but you can see that you can choose resident or faculty for the options. And so as a data collector, I'd be a little bit confused as to what I was supposed to be expecting or checking. Then for indication, again, these options just seem to be kind of jumbled together in no discernible order. And you know that the first two, hypoxia and hypercarbia, they both start with HYP, which could be confusing and lead to incorrect selection of options when collecting data quickly. And then finally, you see what we saw in the last example, which was that you go from being expected to check an option to suddenly being expected to circle an option, and it's not really clear why. In light of those problems, I reformatted the check sheet to what you see here. So clarified the first category label indicating that you can pick a resident or a faculty member, whoever's performing the intubation. I put a little more space between those lines to make it easier to read quickly. I organized the possible indications alphabetically so that it's easy for anyone to find what they need. I tried to make it harder to accidentally pick the wrong option by really delineating whether you're talking about hypercarbia or hypoxia as the problem. And then I changed the last part so that you're checking for all of your options rather than going from checking to circling. I also made it one column instead of the three columns that didn't really align with the previous ones. So some general guidelines for design. Just be consistent and deliberate with the spacing on your check sheet, the number of columns you use, your method of data entry between different sections, in other words, checking versus circling. Organize your options for each one in a way that would seem logical or easy to figure out, even by someone not familiar with your project. Often alphabetical is the easiest way for those who don't know anything about what you're collecting data about. And then try using your check sheet a few times, even in theoretical situations, before finalizing it to see what problems you run into. Now in review. A check sheet is a simple tool for gathering data during one of your PDSA cycles. To create one, you list and define your variables, identify the type and expected range for each one, and then determine very specifically where you will get your data. And there's a link to a planning template after this lecture. Also remember, for discrete variables, if you plan ahead, you should think of a code for those discrete variables to make data entry easier. And then finally, when laying out your check sheet, think very carefully about how to make it easier to use quickly and accurately by whoever is going to be gathering data. What now? Meet with your class, and if you created a gather in detail table when you are building your process map for the part of your process you'll be studying in your PDSA cycle, get it out. You've already done a lot of the legwork for making your check sheet. And then design your check sheet, taking care to pay attention to those design elements we talk about to make it easier to use for whoever's going to be gathering data. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time for the last lecture in the series.